Broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good afternoon. Could I welcome members, officers and the public here in the chamber and watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the Audit Panel. If you could just make sure your electronic devices are switched off onto silent mode to avoid any interruptions. And can I ask members to position their and guests, in fact, to position their microphones so they can be heard clearly. You can aim this part, but if you need to lift it and move it, please lift it and move it by the base, not by the neck. Can I start by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence today from Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you very much. So we are 3. Before we begin, I'd just like to welcome our guests who will be joining us at various parts of today's meeting, both in the chamber and also online. So we have Stephen Reid, who is from EY, partner at EY. Afternoon, Stephen. We have Chloe Wilkinson, who is the Senior Audit Manager at EY. We have Enver, who's the Interim Chief Finance Officer from the GLA. We have Faye Hammond, I believe at her first audit panel, who's the Chief Finance Officer at the GLA. In fact, I should have said, Enver, you are joining us for your last audit panel. Thank you.
I am.
I'll just insert now. Thank you very much for your work. You're unfortunately leaving the organisation. It'll be greatly missed, not least here at the audit panel, where you've been a frequent and very welcome guest.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. So we also have David Esling, who's the Head of Audit Assurance Risk Management at Mopac. We have Mark Woodley, who's Group Audit Lead at Mopac. We have Karen Welsh, Senior... Oh, she's online. Joining us online, Karen Welsh, Senior Risk and Assurance Auditor at Mopac. Diane Tranmar, who is Executive Director, Corporate Resources and Business Improvement at the GLA. We have Luke Webster, who's the Assistant Director of Group Treasury and Chief Investment Officer at the GLA. Commendably long title. Excellent. Good work. Nicole Valatinuzzi. Is that the correct pronunciation? She's Valatinuzzi, is that correct? Perfect, you can't improve. Okay, Nicole Valatinuzzi, Assistant Director of External Relations at the GLA. David Holly, Head of Events for London at the GLA. Vicky Hobart, Group Director of Public Health at the GLA. And last but certainly not least, Rory McKenna, who is the GLA Monitoring Officer. So we have a couple of quick bits before we get to the main business. Can I ask panel to note the recommendations set out at item 2 on declarations of interest and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. Excellent. On minutes, can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of July to be signed by me as a correct record? Agreed. Excellent. And we now come to our first main item, which is the external audit, draft audit status report. So we are joined in the chamber by Stephen Reid, partner at EY, and Chloe Wilkinson, audit senior manager at EY. If you could introduce the GLA draft audit status report for the year ended 31st of March 2024.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So this report provides an overview of the audit status for the year 23-24. I will take the report as read and focus on perhaps 3 or 4 key areas. As you would expect at this stage in the audit, the work is ongoing. We continue to receive good cooperation from management in discharging our responsibilities. We have made a few changes in terms of our assessment of the risk associated with the audit of the GLA group, with a reduction in the overall risk, given the ongoing positive engagement and transparency from management. As would be the normal practice, we've reassessed materiality on receipt of the draft financial statements for 23-24. And we have revised our materiality levels accordingly, applying the same principles that we applied as part of the planning process and reported to a previous panel. There has been no significant changes in scope, although as panel members will be aware, there has been, GLA was subject to a cyber attack, or was impacted by a cyber attack, which has impacted the audit progress. In conjunction with management, we were asked to stand down for a period of 4 weeks, which clearly, while management worked through BAU and addressed the implications of that in terms of BAU. We're now back re-engaged in terms of the audit process, but understandably that is going to have an impact on the overall timeline for the conclusion of the audit and the signing of the financial statements and opinion. And in respect of the findings to date, there are no material findings in respect of audit differences at this point in the audit process, though I do stress the audit is continuing. And with those remarks, Chairman, very happy to pause there and take any questions.
Thank you very much. I don't know, before I glance to my right, I have a question about mayoral development corporations. I know we've had this challenge, is perhaps the right word, from yourselves over the London Legacy Development Corporation in the past in connection to the way that the property and the valuation of property held on LLDC versus within the GLA. I understand there's now a question mark, perhaps a small question mark, about the OPDC, the Old Oak Common Park Royal Development Corporation, and which is, I think, is of a similar nature. And I suppose my question is, if you have anything to say about that, and then also you'll be aware in the news there is a proposal, not yet confirmed, but a proposal that there be a new mayoral development corporation centred on the Oxford Street area. And I suppose my looking forward question is this likely to be an issue there as well?
So let me kick off and Chloe can come in and support. Let me take your first question first. In relation to OPDC, then the audit team there are continuing to work through some of the questions that they have over the valuation of assets. That work is ongoing. Management are aware of that work, and we're awaiting further information from management to allow that to be concluded. That is material from a group perspective, so depending on the outcome of those discussions and challenges which we rightly are presenting to OPDC, then we will report back in due course on that. In relation to the new Mayoral Development Corporation, one of the questions is scale in relation to the group and whether that will be material. So you'll be aware that from a group audit perspective, OPDC became material for the first time in the 23-24 financial year. Depending on the scale and pace of activity in any new development corporations, then we'll clearly take that into account in terms of our audit approach. And when it passes the materiality threshold, then clearly that will be more significant from a group audit perspective than before it passes that threshold.
So it's about materiality rather than as well. So on the first part, then, could you give us a flavour of what the concern is or the query is in relation to OPDC? Because you described that what happened effectively was triggered by a materiality in the level of assets. Yeah. But presumably, if they had been held in the way that you're recommending all along, then the fact that the materiality is well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So you tell me, what was it a problem from the start? Why has it become a problem now?
Sure. So firstly, I'd say you're spot on, Chair, in that the issues that we had historically with LLDC around the asset valuations are the same challenge that we're making in OPDC at the moment. So from an LLDC perspective, we've resolved that, and that's progressing quite well this year. From an OPDC perspective, the assets are new in year, so they weren't there before. They are quite significant from a value perspective, hence why OPDC becomes material this year. We have challenged the classification of those assets, which was the issues that we had historically with LLDC. Now, how an asset is classified, so whether that's an investment property or an item of property, plant and equipment, or even inventory, will drive how it is valued and the basis on which it is valued, and that could have a material impact on that valuation. So clearly management have landed on one judgment for those properties within OPDC at this point in time, which I believe is investment property, is their conclusion, and we are challenging the basis of that judgment. Clearly it's not always clear cut, as we've seen with the history in LLDC, and there are quite a lot of thought processes and criteria that you need to think to before you can really firmly come to that conclusion. At this point in time, we're not definitely saying that we disagree with that conclusion. We're just challenging each element of kind of the accounting standards to say, do we have evidence to support all of this? Is this a really robust conclusion? And that judgment is yet to be concluded. So clearly there may be implications if that judgment changes.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know whether anyone from the GLA finance team has a view on that, or if you're just, if all you want to say is you agree with what's been said, and we will see what comes out at the end of the process.
I'd say let the events unfold. The team just need to, the OPDC team need to show that how they've arrived at that conclusion in their treatment, and there are proper ways of doing that by following the accounting standards and showing how those decisions were arrived at. And I'm sure that our external audit team will then assess that against that compliance to the standard, rather than just here's some numbers and put it straight into the financial statement. So It might be that what they've done is correct. They just need to show the thinking process to get there.
Understood. Okay. And then on to my forward-looking question then. Sorry, back to EY. It sounds like it's, as Assembly members, we get a decision, in fact, as to whether the new MDC comes together, so I shouldn't assume that it will happen. But anyway, imagining that it does, this isn't something we can preempt then. It would just become a detailed, sort of almost line-by-line question once the assets that go into that MDC, if it's set up, you would just go through them and discuss with whoever is then running that MDC as to how they're categorised.
Yes, that's correct. So, so if and when, if or when the entity comes into being, clearly we'll take that into account in the scoping of the overall audit, and the size and scale of any activity in that entity will also form part of our consideration, and we'll engage appropriately, as you suggest. Chair.
Okay. Were there any other questions on the external audit? Nope. Okay, well, in that case, thank you very much. Can I ask members to note the contents of the external audits, the External Auditor's Greater London Authority Draft Audit Status Report?
Noted.
Noted, well noted. Team, thank you very much. I expect we will see you again in December. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 5, I suppose our main substantive item, which is our internal audit reports. We are joined in the chamber by David Esling, Head of Audit and Assurance, Mark Woodley, Group Audit Lead from MOPAC, and online by Karen Welsh. I'm looking, I imagine she will appear on our screen imminently, Senior Risk and Assurance Auditor at MOPAC. David, if I could ask you to introduce each report, and then relevant officers can expand further.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so start off with the summary of our progress of work to date. As I'll take the summary and the update paper as read, but just a few things there. We're bringing the reports today of the Treasury Management Control Framework, the procurement of major events covering New Year's Eve, and the public health follow-up. And Mark, when we come to those, we'll talk through those reports on the substantive points that have been captured in them. Just to highlight that we have completed work on the Estates Management, Health and Safety and Affordable Homes programme. And these reviews we're planning to bring to the December audit panel, and 2.3 covers the work that we're currently either scoping or in the throes of beginning. Just taking you further down to the counter fraud work that we've completed in the second quarter, so that's from July to the beginning of October. National Fraud Initiative, I know we've been updating the panel with the what we've been reviewing as part of that. There were 1,435 matches, there were 1,447 matches, so we were able to, across 16 reports, these have been fully investigated and closed and processed by TfL. I can report that no issues of those matches have been reported, so no further action has been required. The 2024-25 NFI has commenced, and we will be updating the panel of any issues that arise with that new work that's being undertaken. Just to highlight the skills bootcamp, there's an ongoing investigation on a funding provider, and also there's a further investigation into another skills bootcamp provider. This is an ongoing work, and we will update the panel again once that work and those findings have been agreed and completed. And again, I would hope that will come to the December panel, assuming that once that work has been completed from our side. On 3.3, there's the point of dual working, and this is to inform the panel that a prosecution case is being taken forward, and this is by the London Borough of Barnet, and with our assistance, our fraud team's assistance. And this was an agency worker dual working at the London Borough of Barnet and also the GLA, and they were found to have had a prior conviction. This is an ongoing prosecution case, so I can't really say any more than that, but that we will update once that's been completed. I know we've been updating the panel regarding the technology group TG overtime claim. I think as it states in 3.4 that there were appropriate controls in place for the work that was undertaken. However, and the levels of overtime were due to the transfer of the IT systems from the GLA to Transport for London. So what we found were the two employees were actually undertaking that work. The points that were being made were something to do really with the working time regulations, with individuals having not signed off that they were willing to forego the working time regulations agreement. So that work has been concluded. So there was no evidence of any fraud, and the work had been completed from the review that we'd undertaken. And finally, from my perspective, we work with there's the GLA Community Counter Fraud Forum, and this is a quarterly meet-up with primarily with Transport for London, and it's just to update on fraud issues that are happening within the GLA family predominantly, but also on a wider perspective across the public sector and London boroughs. So we meet up and we discuss issues, and I think the dual working one is one that highlights that sort of work that we and discussions that we undertake on updates and current fraud concerns. And as you see, the internal audit performance to date, we completed 172 days of the 379 planned days for this year. That's everything from me. Obviously, willing to take any questions on any of that. Otherwise, I'll hand to Mark to take through the substantive reports that we're bringing today.
Did you have any questions on that initial part before we go on to the appendices?
No, go on.
Okay. I just had a quick question on the dual working one. This was, I remember we talked about this during the pandemic. Obviously,
yes,
the potential for that arose when people working from home. The potential was obviously greater. So I don't know if presumably this is not a new case. This is a case that kind of goes back to that previous period when we've looked at this problem and the justice system.
Yeah, there were two cases. Ongoing. There were two cases, which one we've updated. This was one that was identified more recently. However, it was around the same time. So what we found, and it's predominantly this is agency work. So going back to the fraud forum that I was talking, or the GLA Community Counter Fraud Forum. There's lots of cases that are going through. So what we're looking at now is ways to prevent that. And as you will see in that case we've mentioned there, the individual actually lied on their application. So it was found subsequently. However, if an individual was willing to not tell the truth, shall we say, then later on, obviously, that's then discovered. And I think I've raised the point before that often a lot of this is management control. So where we're talking about working from home, it's that point about what the manager is seeing the individual producing. I think that's probably something we will work with the GLA HR, and of course the GLA family that we work with, looking at updating and getting people to come in regularly just to meet up with meetings and that. So there's evidence that they are undertaking the work and setting clear targets. So I think it's just that management control thing that I impressed that we probably need to strengthen, that probably in the past you didn't need to because individuals were there on a daily basis. But probably a good news story is there's two, and it's agency tends to be the biggest concern because when they're full-time employees, those management controls tend to be better enforced.
Understood. Okay. In that case, if we want to go on to the Treasury Management Control Framework.
Okay. This audit reviewed the governance arrangements for the shared Treasury Management Service provision to ensure respective accountabilities and reporting requirements were clearly defined and properly supported. We looked to ensure that the Treasury Management strategy and supporting policy and procedures were in line with the best practice and legislation and are followed. We concluded an adequate assurance rating, that risks are generally managed effectively, although improvements in the application of controls are required. We made two recommended actions, both of which were accepted by management. Our key findings were the control framework, accountabilities, roles and responsibilities for Treasury management had been clearly defined, appropriately allocated and effectively discharged. The Treasury Management Strategy Statement and GLA Integrated Investment Strategy had been clearly defined, reflected best practice and had been properly approved. However, Treasury procedures were in the process of development following structural changes and therefore did not yet reflect the actual practice in place. Regular reviews of institutions are undertaken to ensure that they are appropriate, and adequate due diligence was undertaken during the onboarding process for new counterparties, and proper approval was obtained. Where a counterparty was subject to adverse publicity or its credit rating had changed, this is escalated in a timely manner with adequate supporting discussion and challenge. Investments and borrowings are appropriately authorised, made only with the approved list of institutions, regularly monitored and properly brought to account. The risk areas we identified, there was a lack of effective controls to manage the cash flow model spreadsheet risks. The cash flow forecast file contains multiple formulas with hard-coded numbers, unlocked formula cells and an absence of integrity checks. London Treasury Limited has now procured a live data cloud-based treasury management system called Live Treasury, which will address these issues and will enhance the cash flow forecasting process. The system is due for implementation by the end of the 2024-25 financial year. The other findings were there was a need for a more regular oversight and reporting of cash flow variances between the London Treasury Limited and the entities for which it provides services should be implemented. And the new cash flow procedures developed by the Treasury team will require the approval by London Treasury Unit in agreement with the entities to which they provide the services. So they were the key findings. So I think Luke and Enver are here to answer any other questions. Or okay, thank you.
Great. I don't know, can't see any indications. I don't know whether there's anything you want. Oh, there was an indication. You would allow. Well, I was just going to say Luke or Enver, whichever you prefers. Luke, if you want to, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to observe on that before we have any questions.
Nothing to add. We acknowledge the findings and are in the process of implementing the mitigations. So.
Sounds good. Bassam, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the first one was, how long has LTL been in operation?
Well, LTL itself has been in operation since 2019 in its current form, so about 5 years. But I mean, it's very much an evolution of the GLA's pre-existing Treasury operations. So this is kind of the culmination of 15 years of development.
So was there a change to how LTL operated then in recent months?
Yeah, so in terms of the point about the procedures is formally previously I had the slightly unenviable situation of managing teams in two different regimes. So I had employees of LTL and GLA officers as my staff. From following some retirements and natural restructuring, we've moved to a delivery model where I'm the sole GLA employee responsible in this area, and all of the delivery of those responsibilities is through LTL. So the entire team now sit there. So that means that a lot of the procedures need to be just recast, reflecting the fact that it is a company doing them rather than named individuals within the GLA, and then there's another tier below that reflecting what's happening within the company. And so it's a non-trivial documentation and administrative task, and yeah, the change sort of formally took effect in March. We've had some issues filling vacancies, which I'm delighted to say are now resolved. In particular, the manager for that team is now in place as of the 1st of September. So we're hoping that documentation will be tidied up by the end of the year, and will, as the colleagues from MOPAC have indicated, the system changes will follow before the end of the financial year.
So we've touched upon some of the system changes. We've talked about that new cash flow system being put into place. Has that already come into place now, or is that?
Yeah, it's actually been in place for a while, but there's a process of parallel running and gradual transfer of all of the information over. And, part of the challenge, and spreadsheets enable a relatively small number of people to undertake very complex tasks cheaply, and there are some good points to that, but then there are the control downsides that we have discussed. So the system implementation will add substantial new controls, but it comes with some clunkiness that needs to be worked through, and in particular we need to understand that the system is telling us what we understand it to be describing. So that dual processing will need to continue for some time.
Yeah, entirely understandable, Luke. So have there been any snagging issues with the new system's implementation?
There's nothing to cause us concern, but it's a very different way of working from a scenario where you can sort of see all of the information and directly control it to something where you have to put inputs in and wait for something to come out the other end. So there's a learning curve for everybody involved. And then once we're comfortable with it internally, we have the process of educating our clients on its use. So I think there's probably likely to be certainly 12 months of work before it's completely business as usual using the new systems.
So have you seen a marked difference in terms of how LTL is operating at the moment with this new system in place?
No, I think the Treasury team within LTL are handling it well so far. So I'm very hopeful that it will give us all of the functionality that the spreadsheets did in due course, with the additional assurance that will make all of us more relaxed.
Perhaps more going back to the auditors, but is there any other issues or awareness of any potential challenges around cash flow?
No, the issues are about the spreadsheet and some of the integrity issues with regard to that. And from what Luke's saying, I think the new process and the new system will help sort of reduce that issue. So we didn't have any other issues. We were quite happy with how the process for managing the cash flow, the process for approving transactions, etc., were being managed, and how the sort of the governance process around the Treasury was operating. Yeah, we were happy with that.
And just to reassure members of the panel and any members of the public who may be listening, we have been always aware of the drawbacks of using spreadsheets for this kind of financial administration, and the mitigation that has been in place for all of those 15 years I've described is that there are many pairs of eyes on the output of the spreadsheets before any movement of money occurs. So part of the benefit of the system, it's a bit of a spend-to-save exercise in terms of time. We have to obviously go through this quite painful process of double-checking everything is working as expected. But once it's there, we can place more reliance on system output, and then reduce the kind of duplication of manual oversight. Although, as recent events have shown us, it's important that collectively we don't lose the skills of being able to do things manually if required, because all systems are, of course, vulnerable.
Yeah, I think I feel your pain there, Luke. And for the team. So I guess just in terms of, so we are hoping once this is fully implemented in September next year,
yes,
that there should be some efficiencies there.
Exactly.
Because those controls are more automated,
yes,
rather than manual. Okay, fantastic.
Precisely.
Thank you very much.
No. I don't think there are any further questions on that, so thank you very much, Luke. We need to adjust our panel of guests just briefly before we get to the next item. So we're going to have a very short adjournment of, let's say, 2 minutes. Maybe that's optimistic, while we just switch over our panel. So we will just adjourn briefly. Thank you, everyone. We can now resume this afternoon's meeting of the Audit Panel with the next appendix in our internal audit report, which is procurement of major events, specifically focusing on the New Year's Eve final report.
Okay. We reviewed the control environment supporting the New Year's Eve celebrations by evaluating the effectiveness of the controls in place for governance of the arrangements supporting the development and managing of the New Year's Eve celebration. We concluded a substantial rating that risks are managed effectively to provide assurance that business objectives will be achieved. And we made one recommendation action which was accepted by management. Our key findings were that an improved procurement strategy had been submitted for New Year's Eve and approval for a single supplier framework was obtained. Clearly defined objectives and expected outcomes had been identified and documented for New Year's Eve. A New Year's Eve event management plan was in place and was regularly reviewed by all stakeholders. Accountabilities, roles and responsibilities had been identified and allocated. Funding for New Year's Eve had been adequately approved by mayoral decisions, including the ticket prices for the event. Monthly accounts were prepared by the service provider and submitted and reviewed by the GLA events team. Reporting arrangements had been identified and documented, including the frequency of meetings. Evaluations and debriefs were undertaken following the New Year's Eve 2023 event, and lessons learned had been captured. The one area where there's action involved is that there's a risk register in place for New Year's Eve that had been produced and contained details of identified risks and mitigations to address the risks reported. However, details of the risk owners were not included on the register, and there is a risk that without the details of the risk owners, risks may not be fully addressed. So that was the key findings for the report.
Thank you very much, Mark. And we're joined by Nicole Valentinuzzi and David Holly. I don't know whether either of you would like to say anything just in general about the audit. It's not compulsory. Okay. I don't see any. I think overall, obviously we're here at Audit, we're looking about a process rather than and risk rather than the merits or demerits of the policy. I mentioned that just for people at home who think we might be having a big discussion about the specifics of the event. One question is about the sort of supplier that we use that we procure for the event, and a sort of decision question really about repeatedly using the same supplier, which I suppose gives continuity, versus possibly going out to market for a tender exercise, which might throw up new possibilities, uncover the fact that there's either a cheaper or a better or a more interesting way of procuring the event. So I don't know whether that's something you've looked at or if you have thoughts on that.
Yes. Sure, I can take that. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, New Year's Eve is a very challenging and very complex event. And so, in the past, we have tendered out regularly year on year for New Year's Eve for the event production company. But we actually think there is more value in procuring on a 4-year framework. So that's what we are currently in. And the reason for that is there are so many learnings from year on year that it's incredibly valuable for the production company to be able to take those forward into their planning for the next year. And if it was not the same company that was year after year, there are chances that it could be lost and that information would not be shared. So we believe that it is incredibly valuable to have consistency across those 4 years.
Remind me, where are we now in the 4 years?
We are in year 3.
Year 3. Okay, and is there an option, I mean, this may be a commercial question perhaps, but to extend or then to review at the end of those 4 years?
So at the end of the 4 years, we will be putting in place a new framework, and the current supplier will be able to apply for that framework.
Okay, thank you very much. Kripesh.
Just a query about the sort of single contract approach, really, because I assume that there's lots of subcontracting going on as well within this arrangement.
That is correct, Chair. There are subcontractors that are contracted by the event production company. We procure one company that oversees the whole event management of the event, including the crowd management and infrastructure, etc. They will then go to subcontractors to get those services to be able to deliver the event.
So the GLA has certain standards that it expects from contractors where there's a direct relationship. So how does it ensure that those standards are filtered down to any subcontracting arrangements as well?
So it forms part of our contract with the production company that they have to adhere to a certain rules around contracting subcontractors. So value for money, open and transparent processes. I think that's probably...
Those are
the main headlines.
But are issues and themes in GLA standards such as the Good Work standard, are they included in that or not?
I believe they are as part. Sorry. I believe they are as part of our standard contracting process. Yes.
So just picking London Living Wage, for example, as an issue. So,
yes.
so if that's in our contracting arrangement, are we making sure that that's in place for subcontracting arrangements as well?
Absolutely. All of the further tender processes for third parties are shared with us. We also hold, after the event and during the process, we do spot checks to make sure that everything is being adhered to and that we are getting the right companies to deliver the roles that we need.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just to say that's across our entire events program.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. In that case, thank you very much, Nicole and David, for joining us. And we will now move on to our fourth and final appendix to the internal audit report, which is the GLA Group Public Health Unit final follow-up report, for which we're joined online by Vicky Hobart in a moment. But if you want to kick off, David.
Okay. We reviewed the public health unit in July 2023 and concluded a substantial assurance. One management action was agreed to improve the management of the key risks identified with an agreed deadline of March 2024. We found that since the original review, the management action had been fully implemented and a new recommendation has been made relating to the shared service organisation's contributions, which has been accepted. We found that arrangements are now in place for the capture and reporting of benefits realisation to a number of forums, and reporting takes place on a regular basis. Updates of benefits realisation had been submitted to the GLA Collaboration Board and the Public Health Unit Quarterly Forum. The GLA agreed to contribute 75% of the budget to fund the shared service at the target operating model. However, there was not sufficient time to finalise the contributions of other organisations in time for the 2024-25 budget. This is now being addressed through the Public Health Unit business case to secure the budget on an ongoing basis for the target operating model going forward, and includes the inclusion of budget commitments in line with GLA Group budget setting timetable. There's the findings from the report.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's a substantial assurance rating, which is always good to see. I don't think I had any questions, actually. Did you? Sorry, I should have. Apologies, Vicky, for being rude. Did you want to add anything to what Marcus just said in introducing the item?
No, thank you, Chair. Only to say you've got the management actions included and that we've been progressing those basically in the last couple of months. So I think we're in a good position going into the budget process for this year.
Thank you very much. Were there any questions on that? No, I don't think we have any. Oh.
Not on this, but on the internal report more generally, I think we've missed. I might have missed the opportunity.
Technically, we're still on the same item, so we come back to that in just a second. So we don't have any further questions on the Public Health Unit report. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thanks, Mark, for introducing it. If I can just put my time machine into reverse gear and skip back 3 sub-items to the internal audit progress report. That was what you wanted to ask a question about.
That's right, Jay.
Item, so you're welcome to ask.
I appreciate that. So I just wanted to clarify, because there's obviously the point you talked about, we talked about staff and the working time directive issue. So just to clarify a couple of points on that one, please, David. So,
yeah, sure.
First of all, were you saying earlier that management within the organisation was aware of the additional hours?
So the in this particular case, the individuals were undertaking the overtime. That was agreed with their line manager. What happened was that there was the payments that were going through, I think, were picked up by finance. So there was concern obviously over the increase in budget. So then that was raised with us because of the levels that were being raised. Our Account for then looked into it. And as I say, because of the transition, it then transpired that work was being undertaken. But this was after a review of the timesheets, the workflow that was going through. But the working time directive then was, well, they were undertaking these hours that were far increase in over that, and they hadn't signed off that they were willing to do that on that. So it was a procedural control perspective, but we did go into intensive review of the work that was undertaken during that period, and it was, as I say, it was found that it was undertaken. However, from a management perspective, the line manager hadn't asked them to sign off against the working time directive.
So for me, there's sort of two aspects of the controls. So one is obviously around the working time directive. The other one is about the budget management. So from a budget management point of view, the controls around that, how do you feel?
I mean, it went to the next stage, but the line manager was signing off against that. Then it was picked up, obviously, from a finance perspective, that there was a budget, I guess, a budget overspend, for very simplistic terms, from employee costs.
So, I guess over to you, Enver, in terms of budget controls, making sure that the overspend doesn't arise, or, clearly there's an opportunity for the line manager to be aware of it, but clearly at a much higher level, you want to make sure that line managers aren't just signing off overtime all over the place.
That's correct, Assembly Member. That's why we picked up on it. So the finance staff spotted the overspend against a particular line and queried it. This went through the usual finance assurances, and it sort of rang a few alarm bells in that why was there so much overtime being claimed by this unit. The reasons were valid, and the audit team have helped get to the bottom of it, and we did go round and round a bit on the iteration of the report till I was completely satisfied that the controls were in place. It was during the ITSS transfer, so the technology group that was still remaining had a lot of tickets, as they call it, open jobs that needed to be completed, but the staff numbers were dwindling because people were leaving. It was a transfer. They weren't recruiting new people. So that meant that the residual staff were having to work overtime in order to catch up with the tickets. So the overspend on overtime is offset by underspend on the permanent side, and we did expect there to be, and the money we saved on the delay on the ITSS transfer also then, because we budgeted for that, didn't budget for the overtime, but overall it came within budget, so we weren't too worried on that. The overtime the EU overtime directive was a concern, because when we saw how many hours had been claimed for, it was something that we talked about, and whilst the management at the time said that the outgoing management had agreed this, there was nothing in writing to prove it. So our internal audit colleagues are right in saying there's nothing to say that that had been signed off. But the management who was signing it off at the time have also, now all the people that we're talking about have now all left the organisation. So this isn't a continuing practice. But at that time, their belief was that this had been signed off, that people had agreed to work outside the EU directive. But as the report says, there was no written evidence to suggest that. This practice has come to an end now. So I haven't got concerns about it going forward. So that is in the past. But it's obviously a weakness that's been pulled out.
So to clarify, a business need was identified. It was clearly, because I think that one of the other aspects is the volume of hours, and that only 2 individuals were doing these extra hours. So, but what you're saying there, Enver, just to clarify, was that actually, so for example, from a fairness point of view of allocating those additional hours to the team that were available, was that fairly allocated across or offered to other members of staff?
It was, and actually, although we highlight the 2 specific people in this report, there were far more people that had actually been involved. So I've got a spreadsheet that shows 10, 11 people that were picking this work up. The 2 individuals in particular were described as excellent individuals who'd been around for a long time, and they could close the tickets off in very quick time. But it still rang alarm bells. I mean, I asked the auditors to check, did these hours actually get worked? Did these tickets really get closed? What evidence is there? So until that could be proved, I still had it classified as a potential fraud. I'm glad to say it's not, but it opened up a few other things. But from a sort of a senior finance point of view, there were things that we needed to check, and I'm satisfied now that those have now been put to bed. But that practice is not continuing now, so we can safely say that.
So, I mean, I'm going to come back to the EU Working Time Directive in a moment still, but on this particular point, what controls have now been put in place to make sure that this is signed off in the appropriate way going forward?
I'll let Deanne come in on that one.
No, thank you. So, as Ember's rightly said, this wasn't something visible at the higher levels of management. I think on the budget review, we are starting to monitor more regularly. In addition to that, one of the challenges was that we weren't looking at the cumulative number of hours that were being monitored over a period of time. That was one of the recommendations. We've put in management controls so that we've got more visibility of what is being worked at on individual levels, and we can monitor that separately.
Because, I mean, the numbers we're talking about here, roughly, back of a bit of paper, sums really, but equate to something like over 70 hours a week for each of these two individuals, which is a significant proportion of their week taken up at work. So it raises questions about their ability to stay as effective and productive as stated.
Your points are valid. These are exactly the same points we raised as well. It was well more than 70 hours, because I was saying, are there actually enough hours in the week for these people to have actually claimed this many hours? But the auditors have gone right back to the individual sources and actually seen the tickets raised against it. The productivity levels have been addressed. I mean, these guys must have been working flat out. Yeah. And they're not here to ask them individually, but I think the auditors did go back. I think all I can say is going back to Deanne's point, and Deanne does oversee the people function. I'm assuming that the checks and balances that are put in place now will detect this sort of thing going forward.
So, given that they're working over double the hours that is presumably the standard contract, and we were saying about the EU Working Time Directive process not having been undergone, what are the consequences for an organisation where that isn't undergone? Where there isn't the sign-off, what would be the...
I mean, the consequences could be that the individuals would press that they were being potentially forced to do that. However, we are talking about an overtime that they've agreed to undertake with the line manager. So I don't think it would actually fall into that. I think this is a process of they should have signed off that they were willing to forgo coming under the auspices of the Working Time Directive. I would just like to add, I think from an internal audit perspective, it was good that it was picked up from an internal control perspective, maybe a little later on in the process, but finance did pick it up. Our fraud colleagues were asked to investigate it, and as Enver's quite rightly said, it was quite an extensive review, a fraud review from our side, to investigate those tickets, to look at that the work had been undertaken. So from that perspective, they had undertaken the work. It had been picked up from a control perspective. However, the Working Time Directive point, was wanting, should we say?
Sorry, just to go back to the point. So, what would happen to an organisation if it hasn't been compliant with the EU Working Time Directive?
I would have to defer to my HR colleagues, to be honest, because I mean we are talking about we're no longer part of the EU. So in some respects, I don't know how that fulfills but they would be able to potentially make a claim if they could prove they had been forced to undertake additional hours. Whereas in this case, I think it was seen as the individuals had taken it as an advantage, knowing that they were coming to the end of their employment with the GLA. So it was in their interest to work more hours to fulfil their salaries.
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure about the EU point. You're right that the action would be by the individuals. I would also point out these individuals, this wasn't an evidence of fraud. These were individuals who had actively volunteered. So if they'd have been asked to sign the opt-out of the European Working Directive, they probably would have done it so that they could work longer hours. So I don't think it was a particular risk that we're facing in regard to action being taken by those individuals, but it's not something we would want as a working practice in terms of the welfare of people in our organisation. So I think from our point of view, we want to look at best practice in that light. I think it is a lower risk in relation to the individuals taking action against the organisation.
And are there any other statutory bodies or otherwise that would look to take action against us in such circumstances?
I have to be honest, I'm not aware of any organisations that have had action taken against them or would be taking action against us. I think it is more in light of NHS organisations where it's excessive, it's perpetuated, and those are some of the things you would need to evidence as part of that. In this particular case, there were specific circumstances around a particular period of time, a volume of work, and individuals volunteered. It is slightly different from other organisations where there are no other options, it's mandatory, and this isn't a voluntary basis in order to provide a different service.
I mean, it's very good that clearly, that they were coming forward and saying that they wanted to do these additional hours, and as you've clarified, there was no fraud that was taking place and so on. It's been identified internally for that investigation, and that transparency has taken place, which is excellent. Going forward, in terms of those controls, just going back to that, I guess, Deanne, in terms of how do we ensure that this is flagged at an earlier stage, and certainly in terms of even if somebody is coming forward and saying that they want to do over 70 hours a week for a whole year, that we're actually saying that that isn't an appropriate practice within this type of organisation?
So I know that the recommendations that came through from audit have been put in place, but that's in relation to a particular team. We are starting to look within the people function at hours worked across the organisation. You'll be aware there's new legislation and new guidance coming out in that particular area in any case. So we are looking at terms and conditions to make sure that we keep a close eye on areas that are operating out of hours, long hours, and look at how that is managed. And we will need to pick up on the latest directives in association with that. That's something we're regularly reviewing in the people function.
Thank you. And just I think you mentioned a new system coming in?
There's new guidance, new legislation.
No, sure, but in terms of the system for monitoring, that's the same, is it?
No, these are some of the controls that were put in following the audit recommendations of what we've put in place, where there's much more visibility at more senior levels of what is happening in the overtime area.
And that's been extended across the whole of the...
That's what we're looking to get extended across now. And
that will allow for an early identification of this sort of practice to make sure that questions are asked early.
Where there are excessive hours coming through. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I don't have any questions on that. I just want to make an observation as a former IT person who's been involved in rollouts and projects back previously when I had a real job. It's quite normal in IT that you want your work to be invisible because people usually only notice it when something's gone wrong. And I'm very aware of the enormous amount of work that people in IT and other support departments, but I'm going to fly the flag here for IT people, the enormous amount of work that gets done in the background, which is largely forgotten, largely ignored, and here has come to light as a potential fraud case because of the sheer amount of work that they were doing to get this project completed on time and to get it all completed. So I think in amongst all of our discussion about controls, I think perhaps we should recognise the amount of work that's been done here to get this project over the line and to keep things running. Particularly public sector IT projects, the reputation is not always that people are putting in a shift to get the job done, quite the opposite. So that and more has been done here. So I just want to recognise that in amongst the discussion, which is more normal for our committee, or panel, sorry, here, about processes and so on. So I think there are valid concerns about excessive hours being worked, but I think we ought to recognise that this project, people put a shift in to get it done, and I want to acknowledge that and thank them, whoever they are. They're probably not watching our audit panel for that work. So on that, I don't think there's anything else on the internal audit. Nope. Okay. So can I ask the panel to note the contents of the recent internal audit reports attached to the report at appendices 1 to 4?
Noted.
Noted. Excellent. Well noted. Which brings us to item 6, which is the corporate risk register to be considered. There's one point that I just wanted to flag up, which in fact follows seamlessly on from the discussion we have just had about IT. So there is a new risk, which is not really a new risk, but there is a new risk that's been added to our corporate risk register, which is around cyber attacks. And Deanne, did you want to say something briefly about why that risk is a new risk and where that risk was previously on our corporate risk register?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've been reviewing the corporate risk register, and we thought it was quite pertinent in light of the recent TfL cyber incident. Just to flag, you're correct, it wasn't a new risk, but it was embedded in the business continuity risk. As part of our review, actually, cyber risk is different from business continuity, both in terms of the controls and mitigations, and the threat is quite different. So cyber is very much a deliberate and an organised attack by individuals or groups with malicious intent, as opposed to business continuity. So we felt it appropriate that it be separated out as a very specific risk, but also to highlight we're never going to fully mitigate that risk. It's something that's going to constantly evolve, and our countermeasures and controls will need to evolve along with that as well.
Thank you very much. Bassam, I think you had some questions on the specifically on that bit.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Deanne, for clarifying that point. I mean, I think clearly it's happened, and I think one of the things that obviously gets measured on a risk register is likelihood and impact. And actually, one of the things which has been evident throughout this has been actually the impact has been, obviously not for those who have been impacted by it, but relatively low on the grand scale of things, given the size of the organisation more widely. So I think I think everyone should be commended in terms of how they've dealt with that and minimised the impact on that side of things. From an audit point of view and risk register point of view, I guess the starting point has got to be what you've just talked about there. So it wasn't set out as a separate item, and given that there have been a number of public bodies, including the NHS and other local authorities, which have been impacted significantly by it, was it ever considered that it should be sitting as a separate item on the risk register, and what was the thinking behind having it as part of the business continuity instead?
I think it was within the business continuity. I think it was felt at the time that business continuity measures are the same as the cyber security measures. But I think part of the lessons learned of this current cyber incident that we're going through is actually we do need to respond to this differently. So I think it was one that we're highlighting and drawing out. Having a business continuity plan, regularly testing your continuity plan is different from the cyber threat. We are working very closely with the National Cyber Security Centre. We've got to look at all of the lessons learned that come through the public sector incidents that have happened. And the reality is from each of those incidents there are lessons learned, and we need to make sure that we have adopted all of the technical structural controls that comes through from those incidents, and that we're as far ahead of the game as that we can be. So that is slightly different in terms of the business continuity response, and I think it was something we wanted to highlight and to make sure that we evidence the fact we're taking the cyber threat very seriously.
Sorry, so just going back to the question, Deanne, was it ever considered that it should sit separately to the business continuation risk prior to the current incident?
I think it was considered it would be managed within it. I think that following the incident, the assessment has been it needs to be treated as a separate risk.
And clearly the mitigations and controls were considered as part of that previous risk item, as it will do going forward. You talked about lessons learnt from other local authorities. How did that impact on either likelihood or risk impact and so on within that item following major cyber attacks on other public bodies?
Yeah, I think that is the point. The likelihood of a cyber incident is much higher than a business continuity risk. So the likelihood of a flood or something where you're looking at the impact on a building is much lower than the reality is we are constantly under cyber attacks, if you think of phishing emails and things like that, that's constant. The likelihood of business continuity events is much lower, and that's partly one of the other things is recognising that the incident likelihood is likely to be very different.
In fact, those two are probably juxtaposed, aren't they? So actually what's been shown is that the likelihood of a cyber attack is incredibly high because actually it happens
Correct.
on a daily basis, multiple times a day.
Absolutely.
But the impact has been relatively low because of the mitigations, post-mitigation, whereas the business continuity, as you say, flood would be low risk but very high impact if it happens. So it's great to see that separated out. But just to go back on the lessons learned, did we change the mitigations off the back of some of the more recent major impacts?
I think so. So to be fair, the TfL cyber incident is ongoing. We haven't got the full lessons learnt from that. Actually, our controls and measures haven't necessarily changed, but we are absolutely working with NCSE to make sure that we have all the latest guidance, and we will look at this current lessons learnt and see if there are any practices that we need to change in light of that as well.
I completely appreciate that will absolutely happen going forward. What I'm asking for is after, for example, the NHS had that major cyber attack and so on, what lessons did we learn? Or not necessarily, I'm not asking what lessons did we learn, but did we take on board the lessons learned from those other organisations?
So all of the lessons learned that have come from the recent or from any of the public sector things that we are adopting. I think that's one of the other challenges. You're not necessarily seeing that in the business continuity risk. By drawing this out separately, we are able to give more of an assurance that this is an area that we're working on and are constantly working on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. If I could just, so you've asked about the, oh, sorry. No, after you. Well, it is linked. Yeah, I was going to, so you separated out the cyber security element or the cyber risk element from the business continuity. Of then the residual impact or the residual business continuity risk, what impact did that have in terms of how you assess that risk? Because presumably previously things like the remote working, which obviously is then a sort of IT-related risk. So where does that leave that aspect of the business continuity?
So we have implemented a lot of the recommendations. There was a recent audit into the business continuity area. So a lot of those recommendations have now been implemented. The likelihood of the business continuity risk, I think, is lower. And that's why we wanted to separate out the two of them, just to show, as I said, things like a flood are less likely than a cyber, and how we respond to those. It puts the effort in terms of the investment of your resources into how you're going to do it. So we will still do a business continuity test. Ironically, the one that was planned was a cyber event. We might think differently on that one now. Just done it. But the likelihood of that is lower. It still needs to be. It still needs to have mitigations and controls. We still need to make sure we have the proper continuity plans. Ironically, they've just been tested. But all of that, we need to make sure we've gone through a proper lessons learned on the business continuity work, that we've got the best plans that we've got in place, and we're re-looking at that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So you had a different question on the risk.
It was on a similar theme, really. So is that the reason for the probability score on the business continuity?
Yeah.
So that's a
correct.
direct result of the splitting off.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so just to the next point, really, which is the impact of historic and current future levels of inflation. So see that has a probability of 2 now, and the overall residual risk score on the matrix is lower as a result. So what are the main reasons for that?
I'll take that one. Impact is always the same, but because the impact doesn't change even after you've done your mitigations, it's the probability that your mitigations reduce. This risk will never go away because inflation is always there at some rate or another, and once the inflation has been baked into a price of something, it doesn't go away. So even though this week we've heard that inflation's come down to 1.7%, which is great news, not necessarily for government funding because they base it on September numbers, so it'll be based on 1.7%, and if the inflation goes up in October, government settlements will still be based on 1.7, so that might not be so good news for public sector. But the baked in prices are there, so therefore the impact is always going to be there. And That's why that risk doesn't disappear. Budgets will still need to have to cover pay, non-pay, etc. So I can't see many of these risks on this risk register. I can't see ever coming off the risk register. It's just the residual risk might be slightly lower, and that's quite a low impact now to have that dropping down to 2 because inflation is down.
Yeah.
But it still stays up there because when you multiply the 2 by the 5, you still get a residual impact of 10.
And the reason for the drop down to 2, so is it directly a result of the actions that have been taken, or
well,
is it?
It's a combination of how the GLA is putting in mitigations to cope with that with alternative models, but also because inflation itself has come down.
Okay.
I mean, if it was still at 10%, we'd be in a very, very worrying position. But a lot of the budgets have now started to soak up the increase in those prices, but that's about as best as it's going to get here, because I can't see the probability dropping down to 1.
But overall then, obviously there's a whole new risk that's been put into the whole corporate register. So would you say the risks to the GLA that you've now identified are, in its totality, a lot more significant than previous?
It's not a new risk. The only new risk on this risk register is the cybersecurity one, which existed before but was part of business continuity. So this risk register doesn't introduce any new risks since last time. There are no new risks.
I recognise it's not a new risk, but it is classified as a separate risk compared to what it was before.
No, it has been. It's been here before. In fact, if anything, we've just emphasised a bit on the construction area. So the construction industry in particular has been significantly impacted by the prices of costs of production and building both residential and non-residential properties, which then could potentially make some sites commercially unviable because it's less attractive for private sector because they can't sell things at the margins they were previously expecting to. So that risk has been there, but it's probably the one that keeps this thing most worrying, keeps it more alive.
Thanks. Actually, just on that construction inflation risk, obviously that we've spoken about that before, particularly when inflation was, roaring away and threatening double figures, in fact, being in double figures. Obviously, that has a very broad impact right across the organisations. We've got TfL, we've got the affordable housing programme, we've got the 2 mayoral development corporations and the police, and I think also the fire brigade, all involved in building one thing or another at various different scales. In terms of how that inflation risk is then affecting all of those, is it the picture here then is that that's stabilising, is it? So in terms of all of those various housing and construction programmes, the inflation risk that's coming in, presumably, because that's a sector-specific inflation, is what I'm asking about. So if there's a sector-specific inflation, is that also stabilising in the same way that the overall headline level of inflation is stabilising?
It's stabilising, yes, but its impact is more longer lasting than other inflationary issues that we've got. You're right to pick up on the fact, Chair, that it impacts across the whole group. And I'm sure when you get to speak to them in the December Budget Performance Committee, you will see the impact that's having on budgets. It impacts on the speed that things can be built. It impacts on the speed that you get your capital receipts in as well. So there is out of most of the risks across the GLA group budgets, this particular risk still carries that implication, because whilst, yes, it's good to know it's not increasing at the rate it was before, the problem hasn't gone away.
So the previous increase is still working its way through?
It's still working its way through. The prices haven't come down. Construction isn't picking up at the same rate that it previously was. The markets are not as buoyant as they once were.
Understood. Bassett, are you going to say any more questions on risk register? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of linked to that one. So risk register 8, and clearly there has now been a change of government which is more aligned with the the government, both at regional and most of the local authority levels across London. So I just wanted to check in terms of the probability, which is now down at a low 2. So I just wanted to check, is that something that's been amended post the euphoric victory in July?
It has been amended. As you can see from the arrow, it's a downward arrow. We have had lots of positive, significant expressions from the new incoming government that they recognise this. You'd expect Faye and I to be cautious, though, because until you see it in the settlements, these are just nice, warm words. It's the currency that we're looking for. Are we actually going to get the money for it? And let's see it. So they are open, they are receptive. Lots of conversations are happening. Let's see whether we actually get increases in funding to help support that. And that's the thing, that some informal promises have been made. Until we get those in writing, then this risk will stay here.
I'm sure it's always going to stay there, isn't it? But it's great to see that down as a result.
Yeah, I think from an overall funding point of view, we think central government is listening. Yeah.
Fantastic, and it's great to. I think what this recognises is that we've got a partner in government to take forward our proposals and our ambitious plans, rather than previously working pretty much against us.
I think there's optimism at the moment in this space. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was worried to go into a budget with so much gloom with optimism, but we bound forward joyfully in this panel. So I don't think there are any further questions on the corporate risk register. So can I ask the panel to note the corporate risk register?
Noted.
Brilliantly noted. Well done. That takes us to item 7, for which we are joined. We move on to the monitoring of expenses and taxable benefits for the mayor, elected members, and senior staff. Do we have any questions or comments? No. I've got a long bit to read out. Can we note the taxable benefits and expenses incurred by the mayor, London Assembly members, and senior staff during the period 1st of April 2024 to the 31st of August 2024?
Noted.
Noted. Well done. Can we then move on to item 8, register of gifts and hospitality by the Mayor of London and London Assembly members? Do members have any questions or comments? Have a quick question, actually, if I may. Sorry, I should have said, for which we are joined for this item by Rory McKenna, who's the GLA's monitoring officer. Welcome, Rory. I had a question about timing. So this Taylor Swift concert that I'm increasingly thinking I might have been the only person in London not to be at.
No, we weren't.
You weren't either. This is how we roll on the audit panel. I think the deadline for the mayor's visit would have been, the declaration should have been done by the 12th of September. That was the 28-day deadline. Do we know when that declaration was made?
Chair, I'd probably have to give you an exact date, I'd probably have to come back to you with that there. As I say, the information and the way it's presented, it's obviously a standard report, and that's the way the information has been presented in the past. That's how I've carried it over. But for that specific information, if you don't mind, I'd like to email you with the information, please. Okay.
Presumably, though, it would have been within the deadline. I guess you would have been aware if it had missed the deadline, because presumably they come into you and then you would...
They do come into me, but let me just double check in the date and I'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Nope, don't see any. So can I ask the panel to note the report?
Noted.
Noted. We now move on to item 9, register of gifts and hospitality for members of staff. Do members have any questions or comments? Nope. That takes us, we're getting perilously near the end here. Item 10, audit panel work programme. Can I ask the panel to note the work programme?
Noted.
And item 11, date of the next meeting. The date of the next meeting of the panel is scheduled for 2 p.m. on the 19th of December. Merry Christmas here in the chamber at City Hall. Any other business? There is actually one item, arguably it's urgent since it is Enver's last meeting, so there'll be no further opportunity to do this. I'm sure members would like to join me in thanking Enver who is leaving the GLA at the end of the month after 15 months of serving as Interim Chief Finance Officer and prior to that as Director of Group Finance and Performance. And I would like to wish you the very best of luck for the future. Thank you, Emma, for all that you've done in your time here.
Thank you very much. It's been an honour.
You are very welcome. And on that highlight, the meeting's now over. Thank you, everyone.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.